And that's what makes Gypsy Rose such an awful human, and that is the ugly truth. The story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard starts with the lie about the number of illnesses that Gypsy had. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
Leukemia, muscular dystrophy. She had learning disabilities, had not been able to be out of a wheelchair since she was 5 years old. And so the community really embraced them.
Dee Dee was happy enough just having medical care for Gypsy. She says she never expected this.
In an ideal world, that would have been where this story ended. But as we all know, I mean,
things are not always as they appear.
Revelations tonight about the couple arrested in Waukesha County for a brutal murder in Missouri.
Stabbed to death. It set off a roller coaster story.
What would drive Gypsy to want to plan the murder of her own mother?
Being in the news is horrible and not true. You know that I love.
And then, in an odd turn of events, we have Gypsy Rose go from being a seemingly sick child to a convicted murderer to social media influencer?
And you have 6 million followers on social media.
Can't bring me down. I'm on a high right now. Y'all can't take that from me.
And the D is
fire.
I mean, what kind of dystopian world are we living in? And why does this feel so icky? What's up, guys? My name is Danielle and welcome to my channel with love from Danielle. As always, all of my videos are based on my own personal experience, research, and candid opinions. Critical thinking is always encouraged here. Today, I want to talk about the Gypsy Rose case. This story is so interesting to me because there is layer upon layer upon layer of complexity to it. You have what Gypsy Rose said happened, her version of events, her story. Then you have what people think happened or they speculate happened and what they're seeing and what they're liking and disliking from Gypsy Rose. And then you have the ugly truth. So let's get into it. The first thing that I want to talk about when it comes to Gypsy Rose is how she went from being a seemingly sick child to masterminding the murder of her mother, which, oh my God, that's insane, to now becoming a social media influencer and how incredibly dystopian that is. But I don't think it's dystopian because people are interested or paying attention. If you really think about Gypsy Rose and her story and her case, there has been media fascination with it from the very beginning. So when Gypsy herself, after being released from prison, is willing to make a Lifetime documentary, willing to go on TikTok and put it all out there, willing to make a reality TV series, I don't think it's surprising that people want to watch or people are fascinated by it. I mean, think about it. You've got the Hulu TV series adaptation of her life. You've got people making many documentaries on her life. You've got the Dr. Phil interviews, so on and so forth. All of that attention, that interest, that's not what makes this dystopian. What makes Gypsy Rose's rise to social media fame so dystopian is how celebrated she is. How people are like, yes, slay queen, you're killing it, you're amazing, you're doing phenomenal, oh my God, you're so great. And they're platforming and celebrating somebody who is convicted of murdering their mother. And that is something that doesn't sit right with a lot of people, that feels really unnerving and is, for a lack of a better word, completely icky. And it's not something that needs to be celebrated or championed and cheered on. And it's people like myself who have been unnerved by Gypsy Rose that have become very critical of her. And now I'm nowhere near the smartest person here or out there, but it's critics like myself that have been able to uncover information. Like the fact that Gypsy Rose has a genetic chromosome disorder that explains a lot of her symptoms. Now, To be fair to Gypsy Rose herself, Gypsy claims that she does have the genetic disorder, but she's part of the percentage of people that have no effects physically from it. She is part of that 75% of people that don't experience symptoms, and therefore her mother definitely had Munchausen's by proxy, was definitely abusive, and all of these things. However, when you look at the list of symptoms that this genetic disorder causes and the types of surgeries that go along with it, it very closely mirrors the surgeries and the symptoms and the issues that Gypsy Rose's mother said she had. And so, with that, naturally, that pokes a major hole in Gypsy's story about her mother having Munchausen's by proxy. And it has caused people to really question Gypsy and what has happened here. Was Gypsy Rose really truly ever this person that experienced abuse? Was her mother just embellishing her illness? Was Gypsy Rose perhaps along for the ride? Did Gypsy Rose know what was going on and was part of the con? Personally, and I don't think this is some kind of outlandish opinion to have, I think that Gypsy Rose's mother might not have had Munchausen's by proxy, but when Gypsy Rose was a baby and she saw that she was getting attention after Gypsy had her first surgeries, Gypsy's mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, very quickly realized that she could garner community support, that she could get money, that she could get favors from people, that she could do very well for herself if she embellished Gypsy's illness. And so I think that's what happened, which then changes the diagnosis from a Munchausen's by proxy diagnosis to something more along the lines of malingering for secondary gain, which is essentially exaggerating an illness so that you can get the benefits of added support from the community, money, gifts, trips to Disneyland, etc., etc., etc. Fundamentally, there isn't a huge difference between Munchausen's by proxy and malingering for secondary gain, but it does poke a really large hole in Gypsy's story. It makes you wonder, what else is Gypsy Rose lying about? Perhaps her and Nick Godejohn did conspire together simply because her mother didn't approve of their relationship and she wanted to be with him, and that was it. Perhaps Gypsy Rose was in on the scam with her mother and knew what she was doing and would play along. It makes you question everything that comes out of Gypsy's mouth. And I don't think we will ever know the truth. Personally speaking, I do believe that Gypsy Rose faced abuse at the hands of her mother, whether or not she was aware of the scam. And I say that because Gypsy was a child for the majority of the time that she was under her mother's care. That's a lot of responsibility to place on a child, and then to say that they weren't an abuse victim because they knew the entire time. She was a child for the majority of it. She was heavily manipulated during that time. I will say there's also a narrative floating around that Gypsy Rose isn't a true abuse survivor because she went on privileged trips to Disneyland. That's an incredibly misguided take, because hear me out on this. Think about it this way. You have a family that's incredibly wealthy and they go on fancy trips, they stay first class, they stay in the best hotels, and they fly on private jets and all the things. But Dad's an alcoholic, and Dad gets drunk every single night, and he beats up on Mom. And one day when they're flying over the Atlantic Ocean in their private jet in complete and utter silence because the night before Dad got drunk and gave Mom a black eye, are we going to say that those children in that scenario were never abused because they were flying on a private jet? Of course not. That is absolutely insanity. And so I think that saying things like Gypsy was never abused because she went on trips to Disneyland really does take away from people who are survivors of abuse. There are so many better ways and reasons to criticize Gypsy Rose. The reason why I personally do not believe her, or why I am so critical of her, is because she crossed the line. She went from being the abused to becoming the abuser. In an ideal world, Dee Dee Blanchard would have seen her day in court and faced justice while being on trial for child abuse and fraud. And that didn't happen because Gypsy took matters into her own hands and handled things in the worst way possible. And that's why I have little to no empathy for Gypsy and her situation and what she has done. If you think about it as a society, when we hear about people who are in prison for being PDFs because they were harmed by other PDFs as a child, we don't have a lot of empathy for them because they went from being the abused to becoming the abuser and perpetuating these acts of violence that are so devastating that they suffered the consequences of. There are plenty of people that are in abusive situations that don't go out and become the abuser themselves. That is why people need to be suspicious of Gypsy Rose. Instead of being an advocate or really working on changing her life or doing good things, we see her fighting in the comments section on TikTok, and we see her having this messy love life, and her story reading more like a trashy reality TV series than any kind of real advocacy work. And that's what makes Gypsy Rose such an awful human. And that is the ugly truth about Gypsy Rose. But I want to know what you think. Am I wildly off base here? Do you agree with me? Why or why not? Let me know. I want to hear from you. And if you want to see a video where I talk about why Ruby Franke's statement to the court is manipulative, I suggest you check this one out.